Ladies and gentlemen, I ask for some personal privilege to make a board resolution, but before I do so, I'm just going to say that we can't afford as a state to lose any of the gains we've made in higher education or any more of the gains we've made in higher education. And we know these are tough financial times, but it's still important to protect and enhance higher education in Louisiana. So I propose a resolution. Whereas higher education in Louisiana is called upon to address unprecedented revenue and budget shortfalls, and whereas on every such occasion the state has balanced the budget with funding reductions to the state colleges and universities, and whereas after the previous funding reductions, any inefficiencies in the administration of the state's colleges and universities have in large part been eliminated, and whereas it is the opinion of this board that any additional funding reductions to the state's colleges and universities would cause significant and long-term harm to the state's higher education system and to the future of our state and its students, and whereas funding cuts to the state colleges and universities have a negative impact on the economic development of the state, and whereas a plan of action is required to ensure such cuts and revenue declines are made as a part of an overall strategic plan to ensure quality of institutions and student success in higher education. Now therefore be it resolved that the Board of Supervisors for the University of Louisiana System proposes that the Governor and the Legislature, working with the appropriate higher education boards, adopt a strategic plan for Louisiana higher education that includes, but is not limited to, the following components. 1, a funding formula aligned with institutional role, scope, and mission. 2, enhanced student retention and completion programs. 3, alternative course delivery systems, including online and collaborative initiatives. 4, appropriate adjustments to merit and need-based aid. And these last 2 are important. 5, not that the other ones weren't. 5, a recurring statutory dedicated fund for higher education. And 6, removal of the 12-hour tuition cap, which is currently in place.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to second that motion. I think it's very important to all of our citizens that higher education have proper funding, and we need to all work together to solve this problem. And I agree with Russell that it's very important that some type of statutory dedicated fund for higher education be found or adopted by our Governor and our Legislature, and we strongly urge him to do so. Having said that, I'd like to second the motion.
The resolution was drafted because we realized that we can't fund higher education appropriate in Louisiana with the current structure. There's many dedicated funds in the state of Louisiana that hampers our ability to appropriate money to other areas, and the current financial situation will require us to make really large cuts to our higher education facilities and universities, and we really can't afford any more cuts. There may have been some things that we could have cut out in the past. We have done that. There is no more fat in higher education. We are down to programs and the faculty members, even considered some faculty members that had tenure, which is very unfortunate. We don't want to do that. So in order to not have these cuts affect students anymore, the universities, the faculty members, and really our state as a whole, we think it's important to fund higher education at the top of the list. And in order to do that, you don't have it be a discretionary expenditure anymore. And there needs to be a dedicated fund for higher education. It can't be touched. We don't have to argue every year with higher education funding. It's already in a dedicated fund. The other reason behind the resolution was because we have currently a tuition cap of 12 hours, and many students are taking more than 12 hours, and we are not recouping any expenditures that we're making for those students that are taking more than 12 hours in our tuition policy. So it's important for us to be able to take in some money for those courses that we're offering at more than 12 hours to students.
What kind of response have you gotten from the resolution so far?
Very, very good response. The board members were supportive. The general people that I've talked to in business are supportive. We can't have higher education on the chopping block every year.
How does Louisiana's funding structure compare with other states?
Well, other states, there's some other states that dedicate money off the top to higher education. Texas is one of them. They have dedicated funds for higher education. They have oil and gas severance taxes that they go to higher education, and those are funded as a high priority. Our state, unfortunately, it's included in discretionary spending along with health care, and in my opinion, we need healthy people who are educated in this state. And instead of using those two as a priority, we dedicate money to everything else except for those two.
Well, I'm in total agreement with the resolution, and I'm very proud of our board, Mr. Mosley in particular, who led this initiative, Mr. O'Quinn. But I think our board is feeling like a lot of the citizens of the state. When this recession started and tough times were in front of us, we all knew we had to cope with those. But I think as the times have continued, the recession, the loss of state revenues, the decline in certain expenditures has seemed to impact higher education and health care a little more than others because, as we all know, it's not a protected component of the state budget. And I think our board, I'm very proud of our board, first of all, for standing up, making a public statement about what they think is important and ways to address that. These men and women that serve on this board invest many, many hours analyzing issues, studying issues, knowing what's working well, the challenges that our campuses have faced. And I think it was a combination of wanting to send a very positive message and probably a little bit of frustration that higher ed continues to be the one on the chopping block. So I was very proud of them.
Explain the situation with 12 hours for students.
Well, in our current tuition structure, when a student is enrolled for 12 hours or 13 or 14 or 15, they pay the same tuition. Once they get to 12, their tuition caps is set. And what we have been promoting for over 2 years as a system is that if you take 13 or 17 hours, you should pay for 13 or 17 hours at the same tuition rate. It does two things. We think it will enable students to be more prudent in what they schedule. Right now, a lot of students will schedule 17 or 18 hours and they'll drop 2 or 3 of those. Well, what that means is that we're staffing some classes that we may not have needed. So we've expended funds in a very tight financial times. Number 2, we want students to make wise decisions about what they schedule, what moves them forward. And so we think it makes business sense. As I've used the illustration before, if you go into a store to buy 2 pounds of this or 3 pounds of that, you don't get 5 pounds for 2. You pay for 5 pounds if you buy 5. What we're saying is, if you take 17 hours, you pay for 17 credit hours. If you take 12, you pay for 12. Now, there are lots of entanglements that have to be worked out with that, but I think it makes good business sense. I think it's a principle that fits the business model, and when you're in tight financial times, I think you need to look to that business model to help you through those difficult times.
For our state to improve, for us to have a knowledge-based economy, for us to get new corporations that want to move to Louisiana, we have to have an extremely well-qualified hiring pool. Now, we've got some very qualified individuals, but unfortunately most of those qualified individuals, or many of those qualified individuals, are leaving our state because the larger corporations aren't here. We want to attract those corporations. If you don't have a really well-qualified hiring pool that are educated in this state, you're not going to get this corporation. So if we want to improve economically, that's the way to do it.
The governor has been hosting meetings with various leaders across the state. The leaders in higher education, the system heads, and Dr. Lazell from the Board of Regents met with Governor Jindal and some members of his staff at the mansion on Tuesday of this week. And as I've reported to several of you individually that have called and talked about it, it was actually a very positive meeting. It was refreshing to engage in a dialogue about what our challenges are and what are some opportunities that we and the administration might work together on to address the financial constraints that we've been dealing with and our financial future as it impacts our ability to be successful in educating students in this state. I think at the conclusion of the meeting, it was not intended to come out with a plan of 1, 2, 3, these are our action steps and we agree. I think there were 2 or 3 important things that did occur. I think there was a clear message from both sides, the governor and the members of the higher education community, that we need to be working together to find solutions, not arguing about what number means what and what statistic means what. But our focus is on how we bridge and work through this transition, particularly 11, 12. But the conversation also was about what happens to us beyond 11, 12, because education will continue in this state. So I really want to thank the governor for being open to that discussion. I know he's been meeting with leaders from K-12 and health and hospitals and others. I think all oriented to assembling what would be the governor's executive budget to be proposed sometime after the beginning of the year. You've seen some follow-up stories relative to that. The system heads presented a little more detail about some options that deal with financial support to the Board of Regents earlier this week. I know something that our campus presidents have been very supportive of has been the opportunity to discuss the possibility of having tuition charged beyond 12 hours. I think it's important to keep in mind that these discussions are not oriented to just charging more money. You know, I was asking in the meeting, is the real goal here to raise more money? No, the real goal is to have enough money to educate the students that attend our universities with top quality education, to give them the skills that they need to enter the workforce and be productive in Louisiana. To do that, the state can provide a certain amount of funding, and then we have to look at other means of those fundings. And one of those might be the tuition issue above 12 hours. It's one of 4 or 5 that are out there for discussion. But I want to be clear, I think that I speak for our presidents when I say this. Everybody wants to have more money, but our goal here is not to have more money. Our goal is to make sure that the institutions that provide the education in the state can do it in a manner to be competitive, not only in Louisiana, but across the United States and across the world. So we'll continue those discussions. I think we had, as I said earlier, a very healthy, positive discussion, and we look forward to some continued dialogue with the division as the governor's budget is prepared.
I think what we did today is continue some discussions that have occurred before with our board. You know, oftentimes, because there's one national standard out there called the IPEDS, I don't remember the acronym, but it's a national standard of measuring graduation rates. However, you have to look at how it's defined to be in that cohort, the group of students being measured from point of entry to either 4 years or 6 years. They have to be a full-time student, they have to be a first-time freshman, and therefore that number of people that are entering our schools is not reflective of the total population we're serving. And then, of course, we have students that come in as transfers, as part-time, so they're not in that cohort. But yet, when you look at graduation rates, which we're very committed to improving as part of the GRAD Act passed by the legislature, our campuses' graduation rates are going up. It's not the only measure. And so what we were presenting today was some information about a concept called completers. If you look at graduations, say typically in the fall and spring at our campuses, those students that go across the stage are called completers. They're earning a degree, but they may not fit into that graduation cohort because they started part-time or they transferred in. We're just trying to get people to understand that there are other value measures besides graduation rates that reflect the productivity and the quality of what our institutions are doing. The GRAD Act does take into account completers. It does take graduation rates under that national standard of IPEDS, but it doesn't sometimes get the same attention, the completers, as does the graduation rate. And we're just trying to get that conversation balanced.
What would you like people to keep in mind when it comes to a discussion regarding Louisiana's graduation rate in higher education?
Well, I think there are 2 very important points. I think everyone in this state knows that no matter what institution it is, some rates are higher at some than others. We have room for improvement, and our campuses in this system and across all the state are working to improve that. But there are other factors that you should look at when you're looking at productivity of a campus, and that has to do with what we call completers. And so we want people to just not be focused on one measure as the single most important measure. And I think if people start looking at it in a balanced way, they'll be much more proud of what's going on at our institutions of higher education.